Monty Albazaz. I am a research assistant with Dr. Salsabil Al-Mansouri's Technology Facilitated Sexual Violence in Ontario Secondary Schools project as part of the Faculty of Education here at the University of Windsor. Lovely to have you here. Can you like briefly introduce yourself and your
Sure.
academic background?
Sure. So my name is Amilah Baksh. I'm a social worker and social work educator. I've been teaching for actually a decade. This fall marks a decade, and I'm currently working on my PhD. So my SSHRC-funded research aims to explore gendered Islamophobia in social work education. So this is specifically shaped by my experiences as an educator, what I encounter in the classroom within institutions is quite different from non-Muslim and non-racialized educators, and I wanted to explore that more. I intend to engage other Muslim women educators within social work as part of that research.
That's awesome. And congratulations on a decade of education.
Thank you. Thank
No
you.
problem. All right, so taking a dive into this article, what inspired you to research and write about hijabi girlhoods for this particular special issue?
Yeah, so really the article was inspired by my experiences as a girl. I was born and raised in Ontario. And so I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. And as I talk about in the article, I was wearing my hijab all throughout primary school, even before it becomes, a religious requirement, and into high school. So I was in the ninth grade when 9/11 happened. And I think wearing hijab as a girl during that time when public perception about Islam and hijab was shifting is a very unique experience. Um, and the article was interesting. It was a conversation between my mother and I. And so my mother's story included divergences. She immigrated to Canada in the 80s. She talks about how when she immigrated, Islam and hijab, it was strange. It was a strange practice, but there weren't the same types of assumptions or stereotypes about what it meant to be visibly Muslim. So she embraced hijab in early adulthood, and we have many shared experiences being both visibly Muslim, social workers and academics. So that was sort of the inspiration there to kind of have that conversation, explore some of those childhood pieces for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I did read your article. Very well written, by the way. And it's like interesting to see the difference between when your mother first came to Canada and how hijab was looked at back then, and then when you were growing up, and you said you did grow up in a majority white city,
Yeah.
so the difference in that experience as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think certainly that shapes, a lot of our experiences, right? Is the context that we're in. I think it would have been very different if we stayed in Scarborough, for example, where there is a much bigger Muslim population. In the article I talk about being the only or one of the only people wearing hijab at school, and that's a pretty big deal for a teenager to be kind of sticking out like a sore thumb in that way.
Yeah, for sure. Could you summarize the key findings or arguments of your article?
Sure. So I want to say specifically the format that we took, the approach that we took to writing this piece was a collaborative autoethnography. And that was very important for us because it specifically allowed us to amplify our own voices. And this is in direct opposition to this notion of Muslim women and girls as voiceless, as oppressed. So it is a feminist methodology with roots in Black feminism in particular, this approach of counter storying or providing narratives that differ or maybe bring more texture to what many outsiders might assume a hijabi girl's life is, or what they assume it to be. So the central findings or the central points of discussion in the article are that Islamophobia in Canada is a political project. So girls wearing hijab are subjected to oppression, and not from within their homes and families, as popular culture and media often have us believe, but from outside. So in society, in classrooms, on the streets. Um, and the future can look sometimes very bleak as hijabi girls grow into women. We're denied possibilities simply because we wear the hijab, we're visibly Muslim. We talk about the context in Quebec where the ban on religious symbols specifically targets the hijab, and also throughout Canada, right, where recent research demonstrates undeniable discrimination in hiring and employment outcomes, economic outcomes, disparities in healthcare and treatment. So through our conversation, we explore some themes that come out from our conversation are silence and complicity, specifically as social work practitioners. That was something that we wanted to engage with, and fear and faith. So we discuss how hijab functions as this marker of otherness, but we also challenge that by talking about hijab as a feminist practice of resistance, striving to center our religious identity instead of marginalizing it, which often happens in academic spaces and social work spaces. We talk about how a woman's body and beauty are at the center of her identity in Western and Eurocentric contexts, and this is not how we choose to engage with our identities as hijabi women. So we talk about the importance of controlling the representation of our bodies and ourselves, and this refusal to have our worth reduced to how little physical space we take up in this world.
A great answer. Thank you for that. Uh, in your opinion, what was the most surprising or challenging aspect of your project on hijabi girlhoods?
I think there were two main challenges as I reflected on this, that came out during this writing, this process, because it was autoethnographic in nature. It involves turning inwards, but we're also situating our voices in the current sociopolitical context, right? So because we focused on this general atmosphere of Islamophobia in Canada, it it was hard. It was difficult at times to acknowledge just how entrenched in political and legal aspects, within Canada, Islamophobia is. It's supported by legislature. It's encouraged by popular culture, right? We talked about the many incidents of Islamophobic violence. One that took place at a mosque that we would kind of call our mosque, like the mosque I grew up going to, that particularly was very frightening, right? And so it's also a challenge to revisit childhood in this way. Growing up, I didn't have the language to voice my feelings. I was feelings of denial or being deprived, this sense of belonging. It had its impacts on me then as it does now. And I can't lie and say, being a hijabi girl is an easy task, right? So to write about all of that is sort of challenging. But at the same time, it's also empowering, right? Being able to write our own narratives, when so often that power is taken away from us. Um, Writing against ideas of indoctrination or the framing of girls as unable to think or make decisions for themselves. And then kind of again coming to this conclusion that indoctrination actually came from white Eurocentric norms, right? And so again, part of the challenge is seeing how deeply rooted white supremacy can be for people of color, for racialized immigrants. We strive for success through aspiring to whiteness sometimes. And I did internalize that idea, right? I internalized ideas that I don't have anything to say, and if I did, then who would want to hear it? So writing against that kind of imposter syndrome is, that's very deeply rooted in racism, has actually been, a challenge, but also a kind of powerful antidote to some of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting to note that in your article you said that sometimes it was hard being a hijabi, especially when you wouldn't know it, but you're in order to succeed and get to higher levels of education or social work or whatever it is that you're doing, you sometimes subject yourself to I guess white culture norms when sometimes
Mhm.
you don't even know it. and sometimes it would like annoy you, but at the same time, oh, it's actually helping me get to where I want to be.
Yeah.
So it is a balance that you'd have to, work around.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of racialized immigrants or children of immigrants, we talk about this idea of like playing the game, right? Um, and then, as you get into this game, you realize, ooh, do I really want to be playing? Or like, I don't like these things that I'm doing or this person that I'm becoming, right? And in the context of social work practice, my mother and I talk about how harmful that can be when you're in these positions of authority and power as well.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Taking a turn here, I want to look at the impact. How do you think your research contributes to the broader understanding of hijabi girlhoods?
I mean, our hope is that it provides a Canadian perspective. I think a lot of times conversations about hijab are dominated by narratives from either from Muslim majority countries or there's a lot of research that comes out of the United Kingdom as well. So I think offering this Canadian perspective is very important. Um, I think also engaging how girlhood itself shapes our existence as adults, right? Obviously, it's an academic article, but it is a lived experience. It's our lived experience. It's an authentic voice. And so, again, it contributes to what feminist scholars refer to as counter stories, right? Stories that go against the assumptions that are often made about hijabi girls. It also adds history because we explore this topic in kind of a longitudinal way, right? We have my mother's perspective coming to Canada in the 80s, and then my own thinking through my entire, there are pieces in there about elementary, high school, university education. Um, and so I think that piece is also very important that, even as we're talking about girlhood, it doesn't just stop once you enter adulthood, right? Your girlhood shapes your entire adult experience.
Wonderful. What, this is a great question. What impact do you hope that your work will have on future research or future education or even future policy?
So one of the pieces we talk about in the article is as much as we are, using our voice and attempting to share these stories, we don't want people to take this as sort of this is the experience or this is the voice of Muslim girlhood. Um, we want to open spaces for more Muslims, more hijabi girls to be able to not only see themselves in literature and academia, but to craft and create their own narrative, their own story. So we hope that our work highlights the absence of Muslim girls from research on girlhood, but we also hope that educators and policymakers take this up and think about how, from a very young age, Muslim girls are shaped by pervasive Islamophobia, particularly in educational spaces.
Yes, it's definitely the education spaces where everything starts because kind of indoctrinated into the public school system or whatever school system you go into from a very young age and you grow up into it. So schools sometimes play a larger role than what parents can influence at home.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And it is, exactly right. It's such an important space of socialization for young girls. So
yeah,
we need to pay attention to that context for sure.
for sure. Uh, with regards to current relevance, are there any recent developments or events that have made your research even more relevant to today?
I think we can say absolutely the ongoing genocide in Palestine, the increasing instances of anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, Islamophobia. Girls are particularly and especially vulnerable to this throughout the world. This is not exclusive to Canada. This is, the intersections of gender, of age, of visibility, of being Muslim through hijab. These experiences of violence, of even to go so far as stolen girlhoods. It's something that we have to acknowledge that, there is still this very prominent belief of Muslim women and girls as incapable of thinking for themselves. There was a recent segment on Piers Morgan's show, and he was asked, so one of his guests had asked, why would a woman why would a woman convert to Islam? And he responds immediately with, they want to be oppressed. Um, and so I think you have that discourse that's still ongoing in 2024, and perhaps even worsening or escalating in some ways. But there is also increasing voice and power as we think about hijabis in the public sphere. So you have artists like, Palestinian Canadian singer Nemesis. She was dropped by her record label because of her activism, and she's since released an album independently. And so there are, I think this points to the ways that we can access our voices. We don't have to capitulate to dominate society's beliefs that we're voiceless or oppressed.
Yeah. It definitely, like, currently, if you look at today's, current events, a lot is going on and a lot relates back to what this particular article and the entire special issue focuses about with regards to hijab and the people that wear it. So, any final thoughts? Is there anything else you'd like to share about your research or the importance of this very topic?
I think I want to end with, the fact that Muslim girls and women are here. We're not going anywhere. We're a very diverse community. Um, we can and we should speak for ourselves. And like the rest of Canadian children and youth, Muslim girls, hijabi girls should feel safe. They shouldn't have to be afraid to be Muslim or to embrace their religious and spiritual selves, or feel that they don't belong here because of that. Yeah, I think that's the piece I want to end with.
That was a great piece to end it with. How can people stay engaged with your work or any similar studies you have?
I think in terms of my work, I mean, I'm on Google Scholar, so I guess folks can check me out there, or LinkedIn or whatever folks are using these days. I don't have Twitter or X, anything like that,
X,
but
yes, that's what it's called now.
yeah, but certainly, engaging with the research, I think is very important. There was also a really important report that had come out recently by I believe it was funded by the Canadian Council of Muslim Women. Jasmine Zine has also authored a recent report. Both of these reports speak to issues related to rising Islamophobia in Canada, and specifically the condition of Muslim women in the Canadian context. So those are definitely pieces that folks should check out if they're interested.
Beautiful. And with that said, I'd like to once again thank you for taking the time to sit down and have this discussion. I don't want to call it an interview. I like to call it a conversation. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for having me. Thanks for the invitation.
Appreciate it. Perfect.